Hi, everybody. We are arriving. People are coming. As you're arriving, folks, how about if you just write down in the chat the country or city you're from while we're waiting for people? It would be great to see where we're all from. Nice to see everybody here. Oh, good. Now I have a gallery view. I can see more people. Yay, we're making it. Everybody's here, more or less. People are going to keep coming, I'm sure. So I'm going to jump in, and it's nice. If you want to use that chat, feel free to do it. And let me just say a few things before we begin about the Processwork Institute. For those folks who are new, if you are interested, we offer a master's degree. We will have a new cohort beginning in the spring. We will also have a new cohort of our advanced certificate program, and that's for folks who have graduated the MAPOF program, the MACF program, or you've done a couple years of study in the country that you're studying in. You can kind of begin that program if you wish. If you are interested in programs at PWI, I'm going to tap an email address. Melissa Perry is our outreach person. And do connect with her. She's anyway very friendly. This is being recorded, our class today. If you do not want your audio heard on that recording, just be aware of that. You might chat it, and otherwise just, take care and monitor your own participation. I'm gonna now jump in and talk about process work as activism. That's our theme. It's a very exciting theme. It's a nerve-wracking theme. It brings up many emotions for people. Let me just see how many people here consider themselves a social activist. Can you put your hand up or make some kind of an indication for those people who consider themselves social activists? That might be in a personal way or in a professional way or as a lifestyle. Yeah. Thank you to all the activists. All right, good to see that. Process work, I've been involved with process work since 1979. It's a long time. And I can say that process work has always had a strong attraction for activists, for those who have not felt entirely at home with the status quo, for those who have not felt that they have really fit in or that their voice has not been heard. And beginning with Arnie Mandel's groundbreaking work in the 1970s and 1980s, process work quickly established itself as a psychology that removed the stigma of pathology. For those who don't have English as a mother tongue, pathology means it removed the stigma of being sick, and instead opened up and valued the great diversity of individual experience. It did not promote a norm of health. That was an incredible relief, and it was really radical, a very radical contribution to the field of psychology. And my own experience, just sharing with you, I was 20 years old in 2021 when I met Arnie Mandel in 1979. And I totally felt something was wrong with me. I felt I was messed up in all kinds of different ways. And my first session, it became apparent to me that my work not only was about individual psychology, but was inextricably connected to larger world issues and values. At that time, I considered myself a feminist, an activist who was on the fringe in many respects. I was also so fraught with internalized sexism and internalized homophobia. And how surprised was I to find an advocate in a white heterosexual man, 18 years older than me. And my first session with Arnie was a wrestling match, if you can imagine that. We were wrestling on the floor in his practice, and a fierce warrior in me came out. And for the first time, I felt that that warrior-like energy in me was being lived and celebrated. It wasn't being put down in me. And it was not only an energy that was angry or fierce, but it was vital and ecstatic and life-giving. For me, that was a real women's movement. So the earliest development of process work focused very much on personal growth and individual experience, but process work rapidly expanded, working with relationships and family work, altered and extreme states of consciousness, as well as world work, a multicultural group facilitation method that encourages the expression and interaction of all viewpoints. By the way, world work will be happening in May in Vancouver, BC in May. So check us out if you want to hang out with about 500 people from all over the world and work with our world experience. City Shadows was a book that Arnie wrote, I think late 80s, and it was a courageous book because it made a link that showed that the root of extreme states, so-called psychotic experiences, were not simply just crazy and meant to be silenced, but they contained messages and experiences that are marginal to a given culture, although they do not necessarily manifest in the most palatable of ways. You guys follow me so far? Any questions? You with me? I know it's weird with so many people. Good to hear you, to see you rather. So I have to tell you, one of my first experiences was in the 80s. I was doing an internship at Clinic Lichtenheid in Zurich, Switzerland. And I walked into Frau Schock. That was her name, Frau Schock, Mrs. Schock. I walked into her room and she said to me, she said, "Fuck me." That was kind of shocking. She said, "Fuck me, stick your big penis inside of me right now." So you're probably pretty shocked hearing that. Imagine how shocked I was. Here I was in my 20s, and this woman says this to me. I didn't know her at all. And I didn't know what to do. But somehow, I was a student. It was my internship. I remembered some of my process work learnings. And I remembered that I needed to trust my own feeling, and to somehow that will probably be part of the process. And I remembered also that Frau Schock's everyday identity was momentarily not accessible to her. So I went deeply into my feelings, into my shock. But deeper than that, I realized I was shy. I was very, very shy that she would speak to me in such a way. So I said to her, I said, "Frau Schock," I said, "I'm very, very shy that you speak about sexuality like that. So directly to me, it makes me shy." And then suddenly she flipped. And her normal identity, her everyday identity came back. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then her whole story came out. And she told me that she was a Swiss housewife and she had a couple of kids, and that right before she had her so-called psychotic break, she had fallen in love with the village doctor. It was a forbidden love. And in her psychotic break, the thing that she did was she took all her furniture in her house and she put it outside, and then she walked outside naked. And that's what landed her in the hospital. She was totally at a huge individual crossroads, an individual edge, but also a cultural edge. Here she was feeling like she was in an experience where she had a forbidden love. And it was also the first time, although she had been married and she had a couple of children, it was the first time that she really had experienced sexuality and arousal. It's the first time she felt like she really desired someone. So you can see that her experience was certainly for her and her own growth, but especially at that time in the 80s, to live as a woman and to forge a way for women of her generation to have new behaviors around sexuality and break out of more conventional roles. This is what made her a city shadow, and this is also how she is potentially a social activist. So in a way, we could say that process work is in part based on a paradigm that is activist oriented because it highlights experience that is marginal and that's disavowed, and it does not have a voice. The role of the activist is actually inherent in our work. The process worker focuses not only on the known experience of her client and the mainstream goals of her client, but focuses on the whole person. And when you focus on the whole, there is an implicit acknowledgement that we embody not only what we know about ourselves, what's more dominant, what's more mainstream, what's more culturally accepted, but also that which is counterculture, which is less supported, which is more marginal. And of course, what is marginal to one person is different than what's marginal to someone else. That is all relative. But as process workers, we are often in the role of advocating for parts of an individual that are disavowed. Is everybody with me so far? I'll just take a sip in case you want to ask something. Okay, so I recently worked with a teenager, 17-year-old teenager, who came to me because he had disturbing thoughts of suicide. He couldn't understand, why did these thoughts come up? He had a loving family who supported him. He was a good student. He was an athlete. He had a lot of friends. But what emerged was how hopeless and upset he felt about the student culture in his school. He felt everyone was just putting everyone else down, that everyone laughed at everyone else, or what we call in English trash talking, putting people down, and especially about girls and sexuality. And he was a very deep soul, this young man. And although he was very popular in a certain way, he was a football player, which is a big thing in the United States. He was also very sensitive, and he did not like the school culture. So of course I was advocating for the sensitive side of him and for him to care more about his feeling life and that he could make this change. I was advocating for him to do that with others and supported him there, but I was also advocating for him in his inner life to be more attuned and more feeling about the deepest experiences that he has. Now, a political activist might say, oh, but that's just therapy. It's just one man. And indeed, this is what that young man says too. He says, oh, what can I do? That's just the way that things are. What can I really do? Can personal growth really have a social impact? You know, when many of us think about social activism, we think of the definition actually of activism is the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. Now, this definition, it focuses on the systemic level in which people work on consensus reality stuff to affect outer change. It's essential, it's important. I am so grateful to every activist on this class today and every activist throughout time who protested, sacrificed, broke barriers. It's important, it's essential. And yet, most of us know that change does not only happen through politics or laws, but it has to impact and affect a variety of levels. This is where process work comes in and might offer a direction and a set of tools. In my experience, people are searching for those tools. Frequently, folks who work toward social change, in my experience, become hopeless or burned out. Hard work to mobilize people, to network, write policy, to demonstrate, to put out messages. It's hard. Many of us are doing that work, and it's great work. I know in Oregon, where I am, there's all kinds of stuff where that's happening. But for many of us, it's very, very hard after a while, and we have to do something else. And this is where we might also consider, you know, when I was growing up, when I was coming of age in the 1970s in the US, we had a slogan, "The personal is political." Anyone remember that? Or it might still be around. Your personal life is political. And so if you think of my experience with my teenager, my young man who wants to change the culture of his school, how can he do this? How can he really make change? Well, it happens with people like him. And getting the support from me and helping him to identify as an activist means that he develops internally and loves his own feeling life. It means also relationally that he does begin to interact one-on-one with kids. Maybe he forms subgroups. Maybe he begins to create small groups, particularly with other boys and young men. Talk about what does it mean to be a young man in our society. Watch films. That there's so many great films around, particularly on that subject. For those of you who are working in that area, there's a really good one called The Mask You Live In that explores issues around cultural pressures and what it means to be a man. It's a big issue all over the world with slightly different cultural flavors to it. But these are things, how he can have an impact. But the biggest impact is loving himself for the kind of man he is. And wherever he is, radiating that kind of sensitivity and feeling and standing up for that in a strong way. Whenever, you know, it's interesting when people feel they have to stand up or support sensitivity, they experience it as weak. But you can be very strong about sensitivity. You can say, yes, I am really sensitive about this. It hurts me. And what's wrong with you that it doesn't hurt you? Giving it back, using a little of the toughness to stand for sensitivity. Okay, but let's talk about different levels of interaction and what makes change. So the systemic level, we've been talking about that. We've mentioned that and support that. You know, but if we think about how change does occur, if I think back, for example, 1965 in the United States, abolishing Jim Crow laws, civil rights movement. I have to apologize, by the way, coming from the United States, I am more US-centric. I know more about the intricacies of laws here, but I'm sure in each of your countries, in Australia and India and Brazil, where you are all coming from, you have similar laws that you have passed. So although we passed laws which made segregation between races in the United States illegal in 1965, that was a long time ago. But look at us here. We are still working so much on issues of race and unconscious white supremacy. So these are not just legal and systemic issues, but fabulous that these issues that these laws have been passed systemically, but it's only a part of it. So we have systemic level. Now let's talk about interactional or relational levels. Making change through interaction and relationship is central. How does it happen though? Many activists, me included, I'm not so open sometimes in relationship. I kind of think my way is the best way. It's my way or the highway. And I want to say my view really strongly. That's good. I want to bring out my view, and I think my view is more enlightened than other people's view. And I'm going to support my view with my facts and my figures. And the thing is the other person is going to come back and they're also going to support their viewpoint with their facts and figures. The deepest change happens through relationship and affiliation, where our intimate or working relationships have already been established. For example, family members who are suddenly faced with a transgender child have to open up in a more intimate way around their own belief system. A Christian person who has contact with a Muslim refugee suddenly is moved by the refugee's story and has a change of heart in regard to his views on immigration. So all of these exchanges that happen relationally in our personal lives, in our work lives, in our community lives, I kind of want to say, don't just get bummed out that there's all these problems in your communities, because there are, but there are also opportunities for us to go deeper, for us to learn from one another, even though it's painful. Now, when we focus on affiliation, I want to just say that a deeper affiliation is not only that we know someone and we're impacted by our relationship, but we also might get closer to someone by realizing that in some way we are the other. For example, let's say I'm in a very heated conversation with someone about gun control. This is a big issue in the United States. We have crazy military style guns that are in our public. They're all over the place. So I have a feeling about that. So my position is we have to have more checks on guns. I want military automatic weapons out of the hands of civilians. So I'm talking to someone, an example I did talking to someone, and I listened to his position. He doesn't want limits on guns. He feels more people should own guns. If I listen deeply to the other side, who is he? I can feel into his position. I hear his mistrust of other people. I feel that he's very proud to be independent. That's very important to him, to be able to protect himself, to be able to defend his family. Now, we might not agree, me and this fellow, systemically, but I totally agree with him in terms of being able to defend himself. I want him to defend himself. I want to defend myself. There are times when I want to draw lines, where I want to say no, where I will fight to the death in defense. So I totally can understand him. And me understanding him and talking to him in this way opens him up. It softens our conversation. Can you imagine that? We find common ground there. And the tenor of our conversation changes. We impact one another. I don't know what then happens systemically, but I know we could feel each other, and that's already a big thing. So that's working and talking in relationship with someone who at that point in time, I didn't really know at all, but a great conversation to have with someone. Another level of change is individual or inner work. This is such an effective level of work. It's available to all of us. However, it often seems to get very little attention for some reason. Changing internally means, in part, that you have to see yourself as the other. How can you see yourself as the other? It's a basic concept. It's written into many of our religions and our philosophies. We teach our kids, be kind to others. Imagine how they would feel. All of this is walk in someone else's shoes or someone else's moccasins. It is very hard to do. Not only to feel into the other person's experience, but to also really see that we might be the other. For example, take a white American man who I was working with, and he has trouble with his teenage son. He says, the son is lazy. He doesn't achieve, he doesn't work hard. Now the father, he has a mess with his son. They have a bad relationship. The father also dreams that he's making friends with a Mexican man. Now, hold tight everybody, because I'm going to say something offensive. because I had to ask him his dream association. What do you associate to Mexicans? And he said lazy. Obviously a hurtful stereotype about many groups of people. Now, and he can go off on a whole tirade about how Mexican people are lazy and they come into this country illegally and they try to take US jobs, and he's against immigration. A very painful issue. Now, as an activist, I might have interacted with him differently, but in this moment, I am in the role of the therapist. My ethics are very, very different. But paradoxically, I'm going to have more of an impact, you guys. Wait till you see. I will definitely have more of an impact with this man as a therapist than a social activist. So he says to me, they're lazy. So of course, what am I going to do? Well, I'm advocating for laziness. What's it like to be lazy? Yeah, let's relax. Let's imagine being that teenage son who doesn't work. Let's imagine being the so-called lazy people who you don't like very much. Let's imagine not being so driven by success and achievement. That's all good stuff, but let's imagine that we're not only that we can be more dreamy, less goal-oriented, a little more relaxed. So my client here, he gets into that state of mind, and he has a really big insight. He says, gosh, I'm never like this. He said, I actually feel very loving and I don't express love enough to my son. I'm just pushing him all the time. I said, yeah, I get that. So he goes back home, of course, and the family system changes. Instead of being a very pushy, ambitious, driven family, he expresses his love to his son. His son feels a lot easier, and he realizes he needs to just be more relaxed in life. So at the end of the work, after we have that insight, the activist in me sometimes can't resist just a little teeny bit. So I say something to him at the end. I say, you know, you're like your son, and apparently you're also like so-called Mexican people. I guess you like to take it easy. You like to express love. You don't like to work so hard all the time. Yeah, Mexican folks, white folks, black folks, all kinds of folks can relax and also can work very hard. Maybe we need to notice about all people that they have that capacity, and he nods. So he leaves also with that. But this is the perspective now of working deeply in inner work. Can you see that? And then he's able to take back the hurtful stereotype that he has on Mexican people by befriending that and seeing that quality in himself. And then you can see how that marginalization is creating terrible problems for him and his son. You all with me so far? Okay. Now, the next level of work would be subgroup work. At some point when we work on issues, we realize that there's diversity in our given subgroup. Both the activist position and the so-called governing view are present. For example, I remember going to an anti-war protest against the Iraq War in 2003 in the United States. Many people were out protesting, and I was walking. I had a baby stroller. My son was little then, and I had my baby stroller at the protest. And as I walked over the bridge, wheeling my baby, a young man appeared in front of the stroller, and he started screaming about the police, the fucking cops, we should kill them all. And I just said, whoa, I don't want to see anybody killed. And then he started screaming at me, you're the problem. See, you're the problem. The cops are pigs. Now, This is supposed to be a peace demonstration, friends. Yeah? He was a warmonger in the group of peaceful protesters. In other words, in all subgroups, the other role is always present in some way. And any activist organization, by the way, if you prepare to do any kind of social action work in the world, it is always best to be prepared by knowing the role of the other in your own dynamics, in your own group. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I'm just seeing on the chat here, a couple people had to leave. Nice to have them here. Okay. Now, another level of change is large group interaction. More and more people are seeing the value of working on social and world issues through group dialogue, through open forum. Processwork is at the forefront of this, encouraging different viewpoints to come forward and interact. Part of the power of world work is the emphasis on including many levels and creating an atmosphere where individuals can actually have the opportunity to speak their deepest truth to a public and actually be heard. Most of us don't have that opportunity. We kind of talk to our closest people, or we might have a one-on-one interaction. But if you can speak about the pain of certain oppression publicly, for some people it's extreme, not everyone, but for some people it's very healing to do that because you feel like you're heard and you make an impact on others. Other people hear you. It's transformative. When we do a kind of world work, there are a couple of roles. There are individuals, but there are also roles that are interacting. And the concept of roles allows people to interact and to have a more fluid understanding of both positions. So for example, I do a teen leadership program every summer. This past summer, one of our group process, some of the Black and brown kids, they brought up an issue that was very painful to them. They feel that they always are the ones who get in more trouble at school. And it's a really big issue for those folks. You know, there's a lot of studies actually about it for those of you who are educators or just know about these things. It's a big problem. There's different cultural styles of communicating, and Black kids, Black girls particularly, tend to get more trouble because they're louder, they're possibly more physical, and it's a very painful issue that many schools are dealing with. So the kids brought up this issue, and it was amazing and true to form. So we had the role of the kids who were feeling hurt and put down, and the other role is the role of the teachers and the administrators. And we didn't have any teachers or administrators in our group, but we could play the role, we could represent the role of those teachers and administrators. And of course, the kids are able to do that so well because they confront that all the time. You can always play the role of the so-called oppressor, oftentimes better than the oppressor, because the oppressor is more edged out to really step into that role, and because no one is entirely so oppressive, so they don't want to get scapegoated in that position, which is totally understandable. But anyway, the kids took over this teacher administrator role. You kids are bad. The Black and brown kids are always the bad ones. It's your fault, etc. Very painful. But at one point, someone says, one of the kids says to the administrator role, they say, "When you say the N-word, that feels like a slap." It was said very strongly by one of the kids, and it went silent. It was what we would call a hot spot. And that made an impact on the role of the administrator. It kind of was an awakening on that role. And then the group process ended by the kids themselves stepping into the role of power, the role of the teacher, the role of the administrator, how they see that administrator interacting when Black and brown kids are complaining, and different policies, different ways that they could help some of the relationship conflicts and racial tensions in their school. And they were very powerful, and they had a lot of great ideas. And afterwards, they felt extremely motivated to go back into their schools and try to bring out the role of power. They weren't, can you see that? They weren't just the kids who were struggling, but they developed into the role of the administrator and teacher that they would like to see in the world. Okay, you guys still with me? Any question or thought? Process work, activists also can work with different realities.
Dawn.
Yes.
So,
understanding roles is a general idea in group process. Yeah. Well, there are different, when you work with a group, there are different segments or positions or viewpoints. And if you can, seeing them as roles, this is not always how to work with a group process, but it's often the case because there are roles that are present and they don't interact enough. If you're able in a group process to really be personal and intimate, you needn't bring roles out. Roles are it's just an intervention. If people are already speaking intimately and deeply, and they're going over edges, and they're bringing in their own more marginal experiences, there's no need to bring in roles. But frequently, roles help you to see the group field. So you often have a so-called, it's often case you'll have a so-called oppressor role, and someone who feels hurt by that role. Other pairings in a group, you might have an insider, outsider. Those two roles are very dominant. You also have a role that might feel very leaderful, and others who feel critical. And allowing them to interact allows you to see the roles in the group itself. Thanks for the question. So maybe I always have too much stuff, but maybe I'm going to skip ahead. Let's talk about everyday activism. Everyday activism is so important. Is anyone here use the experiences of life to bring out their activism? Because life just presents you stuff. Do you do that at all? Yeah, I see people nodding. That's good. So, for example, I kind of find it inspiring in my life when I, walk around the city or things happen and I'm confronted with something. So, for example, last year, I remember I was walking around the Processwork Institute, and this couple, I was walking my little dog, and this young couple, a man and a woman, were screaming at each other in a powerful fight. And she was hysterical, crying. She was yelling, "Stop." She was saying, "Keep your hands off of me." And he was insisting that she calm down, and at the same time approaching her. And can you see that? She's upset and saying, "Get away, stop, keep your hands off of me." And he's saying, calm down. And he's putting his hands on her, which is upsetting her even more. And then they're both screaming at each other. So my dog and I stopped, and we were observing that. And I asked myself, okay, here's an opportunity for me. And I asked, well, what is most marginal here? And what I could see in that situation was the pain, and that no one is listening. Everyone is screaming. Everyone looks deeply upset, but no one is listening. It seemed like a missing role. So I just said, from some feet away, I just said, "I hear her. I hear her. I am listening. I can hear the pain. Let's just listen. Let's not put our hands on her. Let's listen to the pain. Something yet hasn't been heard. I just know it. I know it. Please, let's listen." I said it just like that. And suddenly they stopped. They stopped and they looked at each other and they listened, and then they walked away quietly. A couple neighbors who were watching the whole thing, they came over to me afterwards. They said, "We're going to call the police. Are you okay? What happened? What happened?" I said, "It's all good." "Well, what did you do?" That's activism. So process work gives us a whole bunch of different tools in how to intervene in everyday situations. Anyone here a parent besides me? Anyone here been a parent or is a parent or even a grandparent? Yeah, I see, yeah. Well, you know, parenting is a great place for activism. It is a world work project for sure. Do you have that experience, some of you there? Yeah, some not. There's a lot that you can work with. First of all, your kids always bring up things for your own growth. And there's the essential power dynamic between parent and child. You are the first exposure that your kids have to an authority. So can we raise kids to bring in the diversity of their views without fear of reprisal? That is so fundamental, that we don't think about that enough. You are the first authority, and then they go to school, and then there are police officers, and then there are jobs and organizations, but you are the first authority. If they feel free to bring things up and express different views and feelings with you, that is a great model to be able to do that in school, to be able to do that in organizations, in workplaces, and in their own relationships. A huge thing. How to model good conflict work, how to use the situations that might come up at your dinner table. For example, in the United States and this whole Me Too movement that happened last year, and I think it also escalated throughout the world beyond US borders, I believe I read in many places in the world. So here I am with 17-year-old boys often at my dinner table. And there's the Me Too movement. What an opportunity for activism, for learning. So I sit around and I like talking to the guys. And I talk to them about, I want them to understand female socialization. Guys, this is what often gets guys in trouble, in my opinion. Female socialization, how some girls, and by the way, also some boys, might say yes to something and do not feel strong enough to say no in the moment. I wanted these young men to be aware of nonverbal feedback. And then in regard to sexuality, and I know most people don't talk about this so openly, but I wanted to talk about, and I wanted them to be aware of female pleasure. It's not talked about enough with young women, female pleasure, because if young men are awake to female pleasure and they focus on it, they know more the female body, they know the response of the female body. They don't just go over a girl's experience, but they learn how to pick up feedback from each other and ask, what are you feeling? Does this feel good? You get what I mean? It's an important conversation. And I think many, we might talk to girls about this, but we need to talk to boys about it too. They don't learn enough about that. So kids bring us into situations and opportunities for activism. Now, I would have more to say, but I think I want to say really one huge thing, in my opinion, which is, I think, the most marginalized position or voice in our world is the facilitator. Life invites us to be facilitators, those who can bring in what is most marginal and help to facilitate dialogue between everyone and can dig deeper, does a huge service to our world. So I think I'm going to leave it at that and maybe open it up to some questions and hear some of your thoughts. Everyone is so quiet.
Hi, Dawn.
Oh, who's that?
This is Kirti from India.
Oh, Kiti, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us.
Yes, thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
So my question actually is because I was very interested just the moment you stopped is that how is the facilitator the marginalized, and that I was kind of really interested in knowing more about it. And
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we usually advocate for one position, but very rarely do we put ourselves in the position where we actually facilitate different viewpoints, whether that be in families, communities, the world. It's challenging. What are you thinking? I don't see the facilitator. I would like to see politicians facilitate more, not just advocate for a position, for example, but to see that they are responsible for a group of people with very diverse viewpoints. And how will you hear those viewpoints and bring them forward and learn from them? That would be my ideal.
yeah.
What do
Yes.
you think? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, yes, I wasn't thinking in the general kind of way. I was just thinking like I was thinking in a group and how that kind of pans out. But I'm seeing that you're saying that everybody can take a role of, apart from being their own role, can just take a role of a facilitator in.
Yes, in everyday life, not just as a paid profession to be a facilitator, a mediator, or whatever you do, but really in everyday life, in your own families, wherever you are. It's hardest often in our own families.
Yeah, I think that's what I was kind of thinking about it, that it's
Yeah.
actually something which is in everyday life, especially when you're not really, people don't get into conflict kind of work consciously, and it's just kind of very instant and emotional and everything. So
Yeah.
it's the most difficult thing to to
Right.
take a role, even if you are in a way trying to manage your emotions and your feelings, and also kind of seeing the overall picture. So
Mm.
yeah, so I was just kind of feeling that, yeah.
I love that all the different feelings come out. I love an activist stance that comes out and says, whoosh, yeah, I think that. But it's just not the only thing.
Mm.
There's an interaction, there's an impact. And how can we flow and zig and zag with that and learn together?
Mm.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Someone says, yeah, people aren't taking the time to hear every view. Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask Don
Yeah.
about this talking to a child or a teenager, because I often feel like shy and I don't want to overwhelm my daughter, like
Yeah.
thinking, oh my God, these are like maybe too difficult issues, especially when they are like really huge topics in political and social scene atmosphere that she can hear like anyway, but it's about abortion or about homophobia and other things. These are like really painful subjects.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for asking. Following feedback is really important. Kids are at different places at different times in their life, and everyone is not at the same place. And, doing things one-to-one with a child is good, but like I've had a lot of fun doing things in a group. In fact, I think I've gotten further. My son has had a group of guys who he hangs with, and I've just been a house that's open to a lot of kids. So I love a lot of the young men who come through my house. And in a way, it takes the heat off of my son. It's not just me and him then, but it's all of us, and we're all kind of brainstorming. But also bring it up, say, wow, yeah, it's shy. Not everyone talks about this stuff, but it's important. Let's just talk a minute and then move on. Pace her. Yeah. Thanks for even considering doing that, Agnieszka. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in?
Dawn, I do have a question, particularly with Hi, my name is Metta. My pronouns are they, them.
Hi, Mata.
I do have a question that is perhaps pertinent to a US context. There is a growing tendency, and I actually have no judgment on it per se. It sometimes works for me, sometimes it doesn't. I do not exist to educate you in activist spaces and in cultural spaces at this point.
Yeah.
There is a sort of response to what many demographics and individuals have experienced as sort of an objectifying and invasive curiosity and a consumption of particular people of color in white spaces.
Yeah.
We remain in relationship, right, and continue learning together, because it is, for me, then as a person of color, it is an investment that you are well so that I can be well. Like, it's a collective thing, but it doesn't work for everyone. So how do we dance around that and stay in relationship and continue to grow and heal as a collective?
I think you say that so well. It's a dance and it's individual. And I think the viewpoint of I don't exist to educate you comes from the absolute agony that you're always educating and you're responding even in situations which are very impersonal, like, you know, you're in the supermarket online, for example, and you're a person of color and something happens and makes a comment and, oh, not again. So you don't exist to educate. I get that. Yet, since you asked for my own personal view, if you are in workspaces, community spaces, friendship spaces, I personally don't, this is my view and not everyone agrees with it. I don't think it helps in the long run. I think that we have to also risk, and yeah, you might have to educate. I might be stupid, but if you don't tell me, I am not going to know it. And I can read a ton of literature and I still might be stupid. I might just be the dumb white person. And you might have to also educate me and tell me something. But more than educate, you might just have to just really say, hey, you know, that really hurts. And I feel that is often a very deep edge that isn't expressed. Because if you're part of a marginal group, I find we're quicker to anger and we're quicker to righteousness. Me too, by the way, I have my own stuff. But to just say, wow, you know, I could cry, that hurts. Hurts my heart. Kids, that's why I enjoy little people. They just say that stuff. They just say, that hurts. Ow. Has a different level of impact. That's my view. What do you think, Mata?
I mean, I think consent is everything. So establishing relationship and consent and naming that we may exist in a learning relationship together eases a lot of things.
What a good idea.
I think also teaching people to say no and to step back when they need to. Teach the people who are asking that not every moment is a moment of curiosity.
Right.
I have more questions for you, but don't want to take up too much space. So thank you so much for that.
It's a pleasure to answer your questions. And I think we're anyway at about time. Was there someone else? Oh, someone is saying, oh, vulnerability is so hard. That was you, Mata. Yeah. And how does what you've been talking about relate to our relationship in the natural world? Wow. Yes. I didn't talk much about the essence aspect of process work, feeling into nature spaces. It's huge. Thank you, Alice, for bringing that up. Is there one last question before we say goodbye for tonight? Well, Mata, you have one more. You want to go for it? Someone said not every moment is a moment of curiosity. Love it. Yeah. Sure. Mata, if you have, and then we'll say goodbye.
My second question is, if we decide to establish a friendship contract in which we ask each other questions, there is something that has been termed now white fragility. That is basically, especially for people who are not in a US context, that is talking about hard things like race and such, that by which then the person would break down or cry or, and thus sort of, would you describe it in a way, Don? Or my question is, how do we dance with the moment of fragility where we have a depth of compassion, but also keep it going?
I'm interested in being real. And personally, just to say, I know of Robin DiAngelo's work around white fragility. I don't like it. I like a lot of what she says. Personally, I don't like the term white fragility because I think it puts sensitivity down. And I think white supremacy, in my personal study of it, I feel that white supremacy, a lot of it is based on strength and power and being the best. And I feel that crying and being hurt is real. And I feel white supremacist culture marginalizes that. So I don't like that. But her point that if a person of color brings something up relationally, and then a white person begins to cry about something, and then maybe all of the centrality of the relationship goes to paying attention to the white person, and that the person of color's agony is then skipped over. No, we have to make that apparent. We have to say to the white person, yeah, you're suffering. I see that's really hard for you, but can you also imagine the suffering of the other side? And we don't want to shut that down. And I think that's important too. But your question for me is also very complex, because from a process work perspective, understanding different kinds of power, a lot of people who have what we would call social power or social rank, meaning you get power or rank based on the value of your social status, like being white, being male, being heterosexual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, might have very little personal power, very little psychological power. Maybe that is a white person who has lived through a horrific childhood and has been so abused that there's absolutely no capacity to be open. So of course they're defensive. And if you don't acknowledge how personal psychology then, and the lack of personal power, even with people who seem socially and are so powerful, we miss something there. So it's a great question. I really appreciate you asking it, and I enjoy the opportunity to discuss different perspectives. Yeah. Well, my friends, I think my dinner is cooking. I can smell it in the kitchen. And it was really fun to be with everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. And thanks so much for all the work everybody is doing in the world. Yeah. Hugs, hugs.